Welcome back to Wind to Sawdust. In this third video of our bottle stopper series, I'm going to show you how to make a bottle stopper. Before you begin, you have to know what you want to do, right? You got to come up with a design. So based on my premise of form follows functionality, I had to think about what do I want to use this as? And from there, I can come up with a design that I'd like to use. Now I'm using like a hybrid design. I'm not going to go with a daily nice small bottle stopper that I typically use so they can fit in a refrigerator. I'm going to go with something that looks like a beer tap pull. You know, when you go to a bar and they pull the draft beer and they pull it back up. This piece is a little short. If it was an inch or two longer, it'd be great, but this will work. And there's some other considerations I had to take into it, right? Typically the handles taper down. So in looking at that, I drew out a basic form that I want to follow on this piece here. And then I started thinking, okay, what do I normally do in my process? I drill a hole. I typically use one of these threaded inserts we talked about. The purpose of the threaded insert is that if there's a catch, it doesn't rip the wood threads. If you remember, let me just zoom in here on this insert so you get an idea what I'm talking about. Okay, you can see the threaded insert here, and it just, again, if you remember, it threads onto the chuck, and the blank, it'll be recessed into the blank. So if there's a catch, it typically, because this is epoxied or glued in, it won't rip out and destroy the threads. Well, again, so seeing how narrow this is, let me just see if I can hold this here. What you can't see in the video is maybe about a 1/16 to a 1/8 of an inch on either side is my lines for the tap handle. Do I want the way I want it to look? That's too close for my liking. If I go too shallow, I'll hit the insert and potentially damage my tools. Or damage with something else, right? And I don't want to have anything fly off into my face. Even though I'll be wearing a face shield, safety first. I try to do things as safe as possible. So I am going to use my drill and tap set, and I'm going to drill the appropriate hole, use the tap to thread the blank here, and then use some CA glue, some thin CA glue, to strengthen the threads, the wood threads. And hopefully that'll work. The reason why I'm comfortable doing that, trying that, is this Spectraply stuff is fairly easy to turn, and it doesn't really catch very often. If I catch, it'll just be at the beginning of it while I'm trying to round out these corners. But other than that, once it gets a little round, it turns really easy if you have a sharp tool. So I'm not really worried too much. The other thing to consider is what type of bottle stopper, right? I typically store mine on various stands, and most of them tend to have an arch. They're very decorative. So something this tall will be top heavy. So it won't work in one of those stands. So I'm using a flat-bottomed bottle stopper blank so that it can just stand on its own when it's all done. So I'm going to get started on drilling this out and getting the threads tapped and everything. I'm not going to film drilling the hole. I'm pretty sure we all know how to drill a hole. So I'll come back when it's time to tap it out and add the CA glue. So back in a few minutes. Okay, the hole's drilled. I've got my tap and die set put together. So we just simply tap it out a bit. Go slow, just don't need to rush. given this is spectra ply, it doesn't take a lot of pressure to actually get this started and going. So that's why you want to go slow, because you don't want to go at an angle. You want to make sure you do nice threadings. And then back it out. Alright, let's just do a test fit. I'll do it on the mandrel. In case it gets stuck, it's easier to pull off, more grip. Okay, it seems to be holding there. It's a little bit looser than I would like. That's the downside to spectra ply, because it's so easy. It might have dug in too deep, the die set. But again, I mentioned I'm going to be using some of this CA glue to hopefully strengthen those up. Alrighty, got that in there, and I may have used a bit too much. This thin stuff comes out really easy. So let me grab a paper towel and drain the excess off. There we go. So that'll sit for a few minutes. You can use an accelerator to help that dry. I prefer just to let them air dry. I think for me the air drying cures just a little bit better. It'll only take a minute or two. And while that's doing, I'm going to move the camera over to the lathe and get set up. So we'll be back in a few. Alright, so I have the blank mounted on the lathe now on my chuck with my adapter. This is a larger lathe. I'm using a spindle roughing gouge, and I've got it to where it's a little bit, that's about right. You want to have obviously the cutter be pretty much close to center of the right, to match the center line of your lathe here. So that works. So I'm going to get this started. I'll have it on no speed, get started, and I'll get it up going. Being that this is fairly soft and small, I'll do a higher speed there just to get it started. Okay, you saw that catch, and this kept spinning, which tells me I've probably ripped the threads a little bit, but the tailstock is holding it up. That may still work. We'll just see what happens towards the end. You can see it's fairly well rounded. With the SpectraPly, you can already see it's doing patterns and such. That's what this does. It's got a little bit more rounding to go. Got a little flat spot here too, so let's get that going. Alright, just a teeny bit flat there, but that's easy to work with now. We're going to start the tapering. Alright, since we're tapering down to the headstock, I've changed the camera angle so my back isn't towards the camera blocking the view like you saw in the previous 30 seconds or so. Let's get this started. Let's get set to speed. Now I'm turning to this piece here as my bushing, so that will be the low point, or close to it. So it's generally consistent all the way down. I can feel a little bit out right here. I am one of those folks who believes that sandpaper is a cutting tool, so I don't have to have it perfectly shaped. I can use sandpaper to do the final shaping if there's a little bump or something. What I need to do is figure out how I want to handle right here. I'm thinking I'm just going to round it over a bit and use sandpaper to finish the rounding once I get this initial round cut in. This taper is pretty good in terms of meeting at the bushing right here. So I'll just work on turning this a little bit and then we'll get to sanding. Alright, and that's the basic shape. So I'm going to sand this now to get to the final shape of rounding out the top here, right? I've got the tailstock all the way up against there, so it's still a big flat spot. Sanding will take care of that. I'll show you just the initial with 100 grit, and then I'm going to stop recording because who wants to watch somebody sand for 10 minutes or so? And actually it would take less because this stuff, again, sands really easily. So what I do, I have these pre-shaped cut pieces of sandpaper. They're perfect for turning. And I'll just handle the sanding. This will get hot. because I'm going to go fast, so I'm going to put on a glove. If this was another type of material, I would do it slower at a lower speed, but the SpectraPly again goes real fast. We need to put on a mask because this will create a lot of dust. SpectraPly does that. So give me a minute here, and then let's get started. Alright, you can see that wobble. That's because I blew the thread. So I'm going to go drill this out and screw in an insert. Since I've already got it as far as I can go, I'm comfortable doing that. So I'll be back in a few minutes to finish the sanding. Alright, so now we're sanded, and we need to clean the dust off the bottle stopper blank. I use naphtha. Other people will use mineral spirits and such. You're just dipping it in a little bit onto your paper towel. And slowly just cleaning off the dust. By the way, this wet look you're going to see when I pull the rag off, that's how this should generally look the color pattern wise once we complete my dip method. So you can see it's going to look really nice as a bottle stopper. There, we got the nice pattern going. Now I'm going to let this dry for a bit. Takes about 30 seconds to a minute, and then we'll begin the dip. Now, as I mentioned before, my dip, I use General Finishes Wood Turners finish. And I place it into a jar. And I literally dip it into the jar, coat it really well, let it drip off and over the jar, and then remount it onto the lathe slowly, and then I spin it at like 55 RPM for about 8 minutes. And then I'll turn it up to maybe 400 RPM for about another 30 minutes. And that will allow for it to completely dry. So I'll only show you one coating, and then I'll come back at the end. Alright, for our first go around, what I like to do is back the bottle stopper off a bit. That way I can get the underside of it as well. Don't need to, but I just like to. What I'm going to do is turn my lathe all the way down, get it going to about 50. 69, okay, 54. Gonna take it and then just dip it in and make sure it gets coated all over. Then I have to tilt a little bit. Yes, this will get my bushing a little coating, that's okay. It comes off. Hang over, get the drips off. The SpectraPly may bleed a bit, that's okay, that happens. I get it on the lathe. And that's going to go now for about 10 minutes or so. At the end, I'll turn this off and I'll let it sit for about another 15, 20 It's not that warm in here yet, so I may even go up to 30. Then I'm going to repeat this about 7 times. All in all, it'll take me 4 more hours to complete this. But actual hands-on time is probably 10 minutes. Right? It's a lot of hurry up and wait. It's going to go, like I said, I dipped it. It's going to go for 10 minutes at this speed. I'll turn it off and wait 15 to a half hour, depending how warm it gets in here. I'm in Arizona, so it can get, I think today we're scheduled to be into the 80s, so this should be, I'm in the garage, so it'll be in the 80s in the garage, so it should be at the lower end of the 15 to 20 minutes. If I was doing this in the winter time when it's 50 or 60 degrees out, I'd probably go the full half hour. If I was doing this in the heat of summer where it's 100 degrees in here, probably in 10 minutes. Right, that all affects it. So I'll be back in, well, about 4 hours. I'm not going to show anymore until the very end. Here is the final product. It's nice and shiny, it's smooth, it's glossy. We just take at the end, we take the bottle stopper mechanism and we just now put the two together. Screws right on. Now I could have taken this down a bit more to line up and match, but I like it when they're just a little bit over, especially for this one here. It's an interesting little design. Fits in like that. There you go. There is some things I've learned on this one, and that is I probably could have sanded back maybe around the 3rd or 4th coat just a little bit. I had a dust nib. What I ended up doing, since I didn't pay attention to it, is I just did probably an extra 2 or 3 coats more than I normally would to cover up that dust. I don't see it, so I was successful in covering it up, and I don't feel it. So there you have it, a beer tap handle style bottle stopper. Thank you very much.